Hello? Hello? Hello everyone. Am I audible? We're going to start today's session very soon. So आज का session is all about CNS physiology. So with this session, we are going to start with CNS physiology proper. And the thing is, CNS in itself is a very big unit, and it needs a lot of integration. So अभी के लिए, just because अभी we are tackling physiology, I will not go into that much detail of neuroanatomy for like tomorrow's session or the day after. अभी के लिए we are going to stick only to the physiology के core concepts. Okay. As we'll move onwards with the preparation, we're going to have these. I'm thinking of like doing weekly neuro sessions so that we can cover neuro side by side as well as doing the other subjects as well. Okay, so at least that will give us a sense of preparation for neurology because everything is connected in neurology. Neurophthalmology is related, right? And if you talk about hearing, so ENT is related. Then you have your pharmacology, CNS pharmacology is also related to all of these aspects. And the ramifications are very great. Okay, for CNS. So आज के लिए we're going to have a discussion on special senses. I'm going to wait for 1 more minute and then we're going to start our session. Thanks everyone for joining. If I am clear, please give me a thumbs up. And if you can hear me, अगर कोई problem तो नहीं है, I'll try my best कि आज कोई stream में कोई problem ना हो, but for some reason it keeps on coming. So I'll try my best not to have that. Thank you so much. So we're going to wait for 1 more minute and then we'll be starting shortly. So आज का जो हमारा topic है, the topic for today is your hearing as well as vision. ठीक है? I think it will take us about 2 more days to cover CNS in one CNS. So I'm just keeping because we have already discussed synapses, at least the major portions जो भी थे. I think at least वो headache हमारा नहीं है अभी. And whatever is left for CNS, जो other units है, for example, learning and memory, or whether it is a somatosensory pathway, somatosensory, जो भी हमारे sensations वगैरह हैं, and even the tracks that we have, as well as ascending as well as descending tracks जो हैं, we're going to cover that mainly. Then we're going to move on to your modulation of movement. ठीक है, जो भी हमारे motor tracks हैं, pyramidal, extrapyramidal, and the different tracks जो भी हैं, as well as the basal ganglion, cerebellum अलग से. ठीक है, abhi we are discussing the special senses. We'll moving on to those portions as well. Okay? And then we're going to stop. We're not going to discuss the neuroanatomy. Neuroanatomy के अलग से we'll go slow. ठीक है, we'll go at our own pace because it's very big. तो आराम आराम से थोड़ा थोड़ा I'll prepare the material as well. I'll come prepared as well. So thanks for joining for today's session. And I think abhi we should start right now. People will join as we go. All right. Okay. So for today we have vision. So Pere, let me just start by giving you the detailed anatomy of the retina that we have. So if you look at a fundoscopy image of a retina, we can see that we see a paler region which is known as the optic disc, right? So this whole thing is known as the optic disc, and in the center of that optic disc we have something known as the cup. Okay, so you have the optic disc, and this we have the cup. If you talk about something known as the CD ratio, it comes out to be 0.3 से लेके 0.4. Okay, so this is important in case of glaucoma where the CD ratio might increase. Okay, right. If you talk about the diameter of an optic disc, we call it as a one disc diameter. Okay, 1 dd, that corresponds to about 1.5 millimeters. In some book it's 1.7 millimeters. We'll adjust accordingly. So that's known as a one disc diameter. Okay, so this is the cup, this is the optic disc as we talked about. And then usi ke saath mein we have other region which is known as the macula. So this is our macula, and macula ka jo size hai, that's about 5.5 millimeters. Okay, and macula, if you look closely, it's situated at the center of the macula is situated 2 disc diameter away from the periphery of the optic disc. Okay, so what does 2 disc diameter means? It's 3.4 millimeters. Now we look at the macula proper. What are the different components of the macula? If you see, we have a very bilkul center make portion which is known as the fovea. This is 0.35 millimeters. Okay, and if you see the horizontal meridian, it's 1 millimeter also below the horizontal meridian as well. ठीक है, if it अब हम ऊपर की तरफ अगर जाते हैं तो फोवियोला के बाद we have the fovea. ठीक है, so this whole portion is the fovea, and what is the diameter of the fovea? It's again a 1 disc diameter. ठीक है, जितना ये है डिस्क उतना ही हमारा फोविया है. फोविया के अंदर यू हैव द फोवियोला, ठीक है. जस्ट अराउंड द फोवियोला यू हैव समथिंग नोन एज द फोवियल एवास्कुलर जोन, ठीक है. दैट इज FAZ फॉर शॉर्ट, फोवियल एवास्कुलर जोन. अब यहाँ पे स्पेशलिटी ये है, बिकॉज वी नीड द मैक्सिमम अमाउंट ऑफ विजुअल एक्विटी at the fixation center, at the fixation point जो है हमारा, that is at the center of this fovea. That is the reason why we don't want any interruption in our light transmission. And what was interrupting light transmission? One of those things were your blood supply. Okay, so in this portion, that is the foveal avascular zone, 0.4 से लेके 0.6 millimeters तक, this is that portion which is only supplied by the choriocapillaries of the choroid. ठीक है. So यहाँ पे the central retinal artery is not going to play a role in supplying the retina, and everything is being supplied by the choriocapillaries. ठीक है. We have some other terms as well. We have something known as the paraphobia, which is 2.5 millimeters from the center, and we have something known as the periphobia, which is 5.5 millimeters from the center. So I hope these terms are clear before we proceed onwards. Okay. So when we talk about the optic disc, we have something known as the ISNT rule as well. अगर आपने अभी ऑप्टिक डिस्क को देखा तो ऑप्टिक डिस्क के साथ देयर इज अ कप, एंड द कप इज दैट पोर्शन जहां से हमारा ऑप्टिक नर्व के जो भी फाइबर्स हैं, जो भी हमारे गैंग्लियंस एंड लेयर्स आर फॉर्मिंग द नर्व फाइबर लेयर ऑफ द ऑप्टिक डिस्क, वहां से हमारा ऑप्टिक नर्व जो जा रहा है, सो दैट इज द कप वाला पोर्शन. And whatever that is left is your neuroretinal ridge. ठीक है. As you can see, the cup जो है that is eccentric. ठीक है, तो center में नहीं है. So that means the inferior portion of the neuroretinal ridge is obviously more than the superior portion, followed by the nasal, followed by the temporal. ठीक है. So this is the ISNT rule. But the maximum thickness of neuroretinal rim की अगर हम बात करें, that is maximum for the inferior portions, followed by the superior, then the nasal, and then the temporal. ठीक है. Due to this something known as the optic cup or the optic disc per se, we have something known as the blind spot occurring temporally. Okay, so if you look here, we have, हमें पता है medial side से you have the optic cup here, ठीक है, on the medial side. तो इसी के corresponding visual field पे we are going to have something known as a blind spot. The full name is blind spot of Marriott. ठीक है, यहाँ पे हमारी basically the optic nerve is exiting out. So इस portion पे we are going to have a blind spot which is going to occur, and that's known as the blind spot of Marriott. Okay, right. So when we talk about the foveola, how does the foveola achieves this highest amount of visual acuity? That is due to the thing कि हमारे जो normal जो 10 layers होती है retina की, they're reduced down to only 5 layers in case of the foveola. Okay, and we're going to study these layers separately. So let's see what is the speciality of the fovea. It has a maximum amount of cone density. Okay, तो दिस इज द सेंटर जहाँ पे हमें हाईएस्ट अमाउंट ऑफ विजुअल एक्टिविटी भी मिलेगी, एंड कलर परसेप्शन इज ऑल्सो गोइंग टू बी बेस्ट एट द फोबिया. इट हैज लेस अमाउंट ऑफ रॉड्स. ठीक है. एंड इफ यू सी देयर इज अ 1-to-1 रिलेशनशिप. व्हाट डू आई मीन बाय दैट, दिस 1-to-1 रिलेशनशिप? मतलब इसका सिंपल है, देयर इज नो कन्वर्जेंस. ओके. What happens is in the peripheral portion of the retina is बहुत सारे photoreceptors they converge on one bipolar cell. Okay, so this is known as convergence. इस case में we are having one cone is making a synapse with one bipolar cell, and that is making a synapse with one ganglion cell. It's a 1:1 relationship. Okay, and that what will that do? Basically, उससे हमें ये होगा, if that cone is getting stimulated, मतलब हमें highest amount of visual acuity मिलेगी. So there are different cones which have their different amount of bipolar cells. Okay, so this is all about the retina. Now we'll discuss the layers of the retina. The layers, if we move from whatever you guys want, actually I would prefer that we move from the light towards the outer portion. So we move from the inner portion towards the outer portion. ठीक है. And just remember, outer portion के साथ हमारा photoreceptors है. So as you all know, we have to transverse all of these layers before we ultimately reach the photoreceptor layer. So let's just see each of them सारी की सारी layers. So the innermost layer that we have is the internal limiting membrane. ठीक है. So what is this internal limiting membrane is? This is actually the basement membrane which is being formed by something known as the Muller cells. Okay? So the Muller cells send these footplates. This example we saw in case of podocytes. Podocytes was also playing a very important role in your the glomerular barrier. In this case, we are having the Muller cells. So the internal limiting membrane is forming the true basement membrane via something known as the Muller cells. Okay? The next layer that we have is the nerve fiber layer. Okay? What is this nerve fiber layer? Nerve fiber layer वो layer है जहाँ से हमारे गैंग्लियन सेल्स जो हैं उसके axons will the pierce the lamina cribrosa and enter into the optic nerve. ठीक है. So you have two layers, internal limiting membrane and the nerve fiber layer. What next? The next layer, if you look, okay, so this is the internal limiting membrane, innermost. Then we have the nerve fiber layer, fine. Then we have something known as the ganglion cell layer. ठीक है. So what is this ganglion cell layer? Obviously, it houses the ganglia, जो हमारी ganglion cells हैं यहाँ पे. So this is the ganglion cell layer. Now, a rule of law is कि हमारे plexiform, whenever I use the word plexiform, it means synapse. ठीक है. तो वहाँ पे something is synapsing with something. So now we're having the first plexiform layer, that is the innermost inner plexiform layer. So what does that mean? यहाँ पे कोई synapse होएगा, and here the synapse is between the bipolar cell and the amacrine cell with the ganglion cells. Okay. Then we have the inner nuclear layer. ठीक है, inner plexiform layer होगी, अब inner nuclear layer. What is this inner nuclear layer? This inner nuclear layer is actually जो हमारे bipolar cells हैं उनके nuclei arranged in the inner nuclear layer. Okay. So the bipolar cells के nuclei arranged in the inner nuclear layer. Outermost to the inner nuclear layer, now we have the outer plexiform layer. Now what is this plexiform? I meant a synapse. So मान लो this is हमारे rods and cones, ठीक है, and they're making their synapse with what? They're making the synapse with the bipolar cells. And जहाँ पे वो synapse make कर रहे हैं उसे हमने क्या कह दिया? That is your outer plexiform layer. Just like हमारा inner plexiform layer was the synapse between the ganglions and bipolar cells and the amacrine cells. ऐसे ही हमारा outer plexiform layer है. Okay. And next on, we have the outer nuclear layer. What is the outer nuclear layer? That is the nuclei of the rods and cones. Okay. Later on, we have something known as the external limiting membrane, and now we reach the actual things which is there, which is your photoreceptors. Okay. We have 120 million rods, and we have about 6.5 million cones. Okay. So that is the photoreceptor layer, and the outermost is your retinal pigment epithelium. Okay. And uske niche we have the Brooks membrane, and ultimately we have the choroid. That's not a discussion aaj ke liye. But just remember, and the thing I would like you to remember is I will give you a mnemonic to remember all of these 10 layers. If you proceed from the innermost to the outermost layer, I remember it like this. ING, this thing you have to remember. Then remember IOP square. Okay. So what does this mnemonic means? It means inner limiting membrane, that's I. Then you have the N layer, that is the nerve fiber layer. Then you have the ganglion. Okay. ये तीन हो गए. Then what does I mean actually? It means the inner plexiform layer. What does the O mean? Okay. So this I, ये जो mnemonic है, this is your IOP जो है. This means the inner plexiform layer. Then we have the outer nuclear layer. And then what do I mean by this is कि पहले we have the plexiform layer. All right. If you're moving it from the innermost to outermost, so it's the internal limiting membrane, nerve fiber layer. Then you have the ganglion cell layer. उसके बाद we have the eyes, दोनों के दोनों जो eyes हैं, that is your inner plexiform layer and your internal nuclear layer. Then we have the two O's, that is your outer plexiform layer and your outer nuclear layer. Then we have the two P's, okay? That is your photoreceptors and your pigment epithelium. So this is a mnemonic that I have for you guys. So it's ING and it's IOP square, okay? So it's like I2, O2, P2. The only thing is mnemonic which is missing is the external limiting membrane, which we have to remember, okay? So this is what I mean by the 10 layers. So we have the inner, just remember, the inner line, 9 layers, and then you have the retinal pigment epithelium over here, okay? So what is the supply of the retina? I would say the central retinal artery supplies the inner 6 layers, okay? And your outer 4 layers, and that is being supplied by the choriocapillaries, which are running in the choroid, okay? Right. So these are the choroidal capillaries. So these are the layers of the retina, as I would say. So again, just seeing from innermost to outermost, if we go, अभी हमने जो mnemonic देखा उसके accordingly देखते हैं. So this is the innermost portion, this is the outermost portion. The light is entering like this. So we remember it like the same thing, right? Then with the internal limiting membrane, they've not mentioned that. But we have the nerve fiber layer, then we have the ganglion cell layer, then we have two eyes, inner plexiform layer, then we have the inner nuclear layer. Then you have two O's, that's the outer plexiform layer, then your outer nuclear layer. Then you have two P's, that are pigment epithelium and your photoreceptor segments. And iske beech mein you have something known as the outer external limiting membrane. So these are the different layers of the retina. So let's proceed onwards. So we have two types of cells जो कि important है. इनके लिए it's not that important for physiology per se, but you have two types. That first is your horizontal cells. Okay. So where are the horizontal cells and what do they do actually? Horizontal cells actually provide the lateral inhibition. Okay. What do I mean by lateral inhibition is कि अगर एक cone अगर excite हो रहा है, it's going to inhibit the other cones, right? So this is like this. This is the horizontal cell, and if you're seeing this cone is getting excited, it's going to inhibit its lateral जो भी components हैं. So that is the role of your horizontal cell. And ऐसे ही we have something known as the amacrine cells. And amacrine cells are also very elusive for physiology because some say they play a role in spatial orientation, how you can detect some objects are oriented in space, and other people say they have some different amount of functions. But horizontal cells का जो main function है, that is to maintain the visual acuity by providing contrast by enabling lateral inhibition between the photoreceptors and the bipolar cells. Okay. Now let's talk about the pigment epithelium now. So as we saw, pigment epithelium, this is the pigment epithelium layer. These photoreceptors के जो outer segment है, they are burrowing itself into the pigment epithelium. So why is the pigment epithelium so important for us? First thing is, जो भी हमारे photoreceptors हैं, they have something known as these membrane bound discs. Okay, so these are these membrane discs, I would say. All right. And what are these membrane discs? इस मेम्ब्रेन डिस्क पे ही आपका जो रोडोप्सिन और whatever is the pigments that we use, जो हमारे retinal pigments हैं, they're embedded in this discs. So the job of the pigment epithelium is, just like everything gets old, these discs are also meant to be shed off and replaced. So whatever जो भी हमारा removal of the old disc है, that is facilitated by the pigment epithelium. That's one of its function. ठीक है? The second function is going to regenerate the photopigment molecule by something known as the retinoid cycle. ठीक है? So what do I mean by that is, whenever light transduction जब हम पाथ में अभी पढ़ेंगे, so 11 cis retinal जो है, it's get converted into all trans retinal. ठीक है? All trans retinal. Now the job of this layer is to convert this all trans retinal back into the 11 cis retinal so that it can bind with your rhodopsin. Okay? So that's the job of the pigment epithelium. What else? It has a phagocyte function. अभी हमने देखा है, facilitation of phagocyte turnover. It also plays a role in storage, metabolism, and transport of your vitamin A, and it absorbs whatever stray light is there, so that scattering ना हो पाए within the retina. That is the job of a pigment epithelium. Scattering को prevent करने के लिए we also have the choroid layer. ठीक है? So this is the main function of the pigment epithelium. All right. So something about phototransduction now. अभी तक हम जो भी कहीं पे भी हम रिसेप्टर्स वगैरह पढ़ते हैं, then we already talk about is the refractive period, we talk about the action potential, but यहाँ पे थोड़े से differences आएंगे which I'm going to tell you beforehand. ठीक है? So what is that difference? First difference is there are no action potentials. ठीक है? So photoreceptors, they do not have action potentials. Bipolar cells, they do not have action potentials. The place where the action potential gets generated is the ganglion cell. Okay? So remember that for me. Ganglion cells are the one which are going to generate the action potential. उससे पहले we are always going to talk about in case of graded potentials, मतलब decremental potentials, also known as electrotonic potentials, not the action potential जिसे हम कहते हैं. ठीक है? So no, there are no action potentials. So there are graded change in membrane potential. They're going to generate your graded potentials. And unlike whatever that we have already seen, whenever we study in neuro, is whenever we provide a stimulus, we get something known as depolarization. यहाँ पे the opposite is going to happen. Whenever light is going to come, the photoreceptors are going to react very weirdly, and they're basically going to hyperpolarize. Okay, so it's a very important difference. So light जब आएगा photoreceptor पे, it's going to undergo hyperpolarization. That means dark में the photoreceptors are depolarized. Okay, that's at minus 40 millivolts. So let's discuss. So what do I mean by the photopigments is, we have something known as opsin, we have something known as retinal. So opsin जो है वो depend करता है, if you talk about the rods, it's scotopsin, and in case of cones, it's photopsin. ठीक है? So rhodopsin, it's also known as the visual purple. ठीक है? तो ये हमारा done हो गया. अब जो cone pigment है, that depends upon either it is a low wavelength, or we can have middle wavelength, or we can have the short wavelength. ठीक है? इसके accordingly the cone pigments is derived. So low wavelength, when I talk about the longer wavelength, sorry. So this is the longer wavelength. Okay, this is the middle one. So longer wavelength is basically erythrolate. That will correspond to your longer wavelength wala of the visual spectrum. That's your red color. Okay. When you talk about the middle one, it's green color, and when we talk about the short wavelength wala, that's your cyanolate. That's your blue color. Okay. Now this is the thing that I was talking about. When we go to the longer part of the wavelength, that's your red cone. Then you have the green cone. Then you have the blue cone. Okay. And what about the rods? The rods are basically blue-green sensitive. So they're lying somewhere between your blue and green cones. Okay? Right. All right. So now let's discuss something known as your phototransduction. How is this all mediated? So let me just tell you something. Whenever in the dark, abhi humne padha, whenever the photoreceptors are in the dark, they have a potential of minus 40 millivolts. Fine. Whenever light comes, what's going to happen is this rhodopsin molecule. Abhi humne kya padha? Abhi we are going to use, whenever you're discussing phototransduction, the example that we're using is case of rods. Okay, so rods have what? They have the rhodopsin. We're not going to use the cone as an example. We're going to use rods. So what's going to happen in dark? It's light. So what's going to happen? Now, as soon as light comes, this rhodopsin gets converted to bath rhodopsin. Okay, just follow this very carefully. Bath rhodopsin. How much time does, and this bath rhodopsin in picoseconds gets converted to lumirhodopsin. This lumirhodopsin gets converted into metarhodopsin in microseconds. This metarhodopsin gets converted to metarhodopsin 2 in what? In milliseconds. Okay? So this metarhodopsin now, this metarhodopsin 2 is ultimately going to get converted into scotopsin again. Okay? But what has happened to our 11th cis retinal? Actually, the 11th cis retinal now has underwent a change, and it has been inactivated, I would say, into all trans retinal. Okay? All trans retinal. So this is what is happening in case of your photopigments. We saw rhodopsin hai, bathrodopsin, lumirhodopsin, metarhodopsin 2, and then your scotopsin. Until and unless this scotopsin is not associated with the 11th cis retinal, it will remain as scotopsin. Okay? Once the 11th cis retinal is there, then we're going to have the formation of your rhodopsin. All right. So whatever this is happening, how is this all trans retinal going to get converted into 11 cis retinal? That is facilitated by what? This all process will occur in the retinal pigment epithelium. Okay, so regeneration जो भी हमारा 11 cis retinal का वो करेगा. Now, I didn't tell you guys ki what actually will happen. So whenever one photon comes, it's going to activate rhodopsin, right? अभी हमने देखा कि rhodopsin जो है, it's going to activate ये सारे इसके active stages हैं. All right. What's going to happen is this rhodopsin molecule is going to activate something known as your transducin. Okay. So what is this transducin? It's actually a G protein. Okay. It's a trimeric G protein, transducin. So what is this transducin going to do? It's going to activate something known as phosphodiesterase. And this phosphodiesterase is going to convert your cyclic GMP into GMP. Okay. And what will happen to the cyclic GMP then, you might ask? So the cyclic GMP levels are actually going to fall. Okay. This actually your cyclic GMP था, ये जो सारे now on the outer segment, this is the outer segment, this is the inner segment of your photoreceptors. So the outer segment of the photoreceptors पे you have these channels known as cyclic GMP gated sodium channels. Okay, so they were gated by sodium, they were gated by your cyclic GMP. So whenever cyclic GMP was there, these sodium channels were active. Now the cyclic GMP is not there, these sodium channels are inactive. So what is the cell going to do? The cell was earlier at minus 40 millivolts. Now it's going to drop its potential down to either minus 70 millivolts. So that is known as what? That's known as hyperpolarization. Okay. So this is the process by which all of this is mediated. So let's see again. So, but यहाँ पे भी there's going to be amplification occurring over here, guys. Okay. So there is some amount of amplification occurring here. Okay. Yeah. So there's going to be some amount of amplification. Matlab one photon is going to activate one rhodopsin. That's fine. But one rhodopsin is going to transduce about 800. It's going to activate about 800 transducins. And each transducin is going to activate further, is going to degrade your 6 cyclic GMPs. Okay? So 800 transducin is going to activate 800 phosphodiesterase. And this 800 phosphodiesterase, each one of those activated phosphodiesterase is going to cleave 6 more. So now we are having 4800 breakdown of your cyclic GMPs, 4800 molecules. Okay? And what is that going to translate into? This amount of translation, ultimately one photon जो है, is going to lead to closure of about 200 cyclic GMP gated sodium channels. So this is the amount of amplification that we are talking about. And as we saw, the retinoid cycle, कि जो भी हमारा जो 11 all trans retinol है, all trans retinol gets converted to all trans retinol in the photoreceptors, and this all trans retinol is bound by something known as the interphosphoreceptor retinoid binding protein, and it's going to get recycled into the retinal pigment epithelium to form again the 11 cis retinol. And this 11 cis retinol is again going to get transported by the chaperone protein inside the photoreceptors again. Okay, so all in all, this retinoid cycle is basically occurring in the retinal pigment epithelium, converting the 11 cis retinol into your all trans retinol. Okay, so this is what we talked about. All right. Okay, so let's move again. So this is the structure of your photoreceptors as we were seeing. We have the rods, we have the cones. As you can see, there are some differences. If you see, यहाँ पे जो outer segments है, they're actually modified cilia. ठीक है, so this is something on the outer segment, this is something on the inner segment, and ये हमारा nuclear वाला zone है, ठीक है, and this is हमारा synaptic terminal. It's going to form the outer plex, your inner plexiform layer जो हमने यहाँ पे पढ़ा था. In case of the rods, you have these something known as the double membrane disc. As you can see, they're like disc-like. But in case of cones, these are only membrane foldings known as saccules. So there's a difference between rods and cones. As you can see, this is more like rectangular, and this cone is something like triangular, obviously. The outer segment I'm talking about. And isme you're having these double membrane discs, where here you're having your membrane enfoldings. So these are the differences between your cones and rods. Let's go over them very quickly. The cones, 90 million, and your rods actually ulta hai ye. Okay? So rods are more. This is 4.5 million, and your cones, some books say rods is 90 million, some can say it about 120 million, but cones are fixed at about 4.5 million. Okay, right. So what about the cones? Cones, if you talk about the light stimulus की sensitivity, it's very low, but rods are very sensitive to your light stimulus. Okay, जितना छोटा सा भी light stimulus में, they're going to be very active. What about the photosensitive pigments used? यहाँ पे less abundant, they're more abundant over here. This is very important. The response to the light stimulus in case of cones is very fast as compared to the rods. And they're specialized for what? They're specialized for day vision. What is that known as? That's known as photopic vision. Whereas the rods are specialized for your night vision. That's known as scotopic vision. Whenever there is a degeneration of the cones, you're going to have legal blindness. You can't be able to see anything. But in case of cones, we're going to survive with the existing. But in the case of rods, we're going to survive with the existing cones. So there is not going to be any legal blindness per se, but we are going to suffer from something known as night blindness, nyctalopia, right? If you talk about the acutive vision, very high in case of cones. As we discussed, fovea या fovea में, you have the maximum cone density that provides the maximum amount of visual acuity. They're very visually active. So acuity of vision is maximum for cones as compared to your rods. Okay. When you talk about the saturation now, they're going to saturate only when the light is very intense, but rods are going to saturate in your daylight. ठीक है. ऑल ऑफ द मेम्ब्रेन, जो भी हमारे मेम्ब्रेन पिगमेंट्स हैं, वो सब के सब ब्लीच हो जाएंगे व्हेन वी एंटर इनटू डे लाइट. तो डे लाइट में दैट इज अ फोटोपिक विजन में, दैट इज द रीजन व्हाई कोन्स आर प्लेइंग अ मेजर रोल. ठीक है. Role in color vision, obviously it mediates color vision. That is your three types of cone cells जो हमने पढ़े. And concentration in the fovea is very high in case of your rod, in case of your cones. And relative numbers we saw less numerous than the rods, and here there is more numerous than the rods. And the ratio is about 20:1. Okay, right. So this is what we were talking about. We can have something known as convergence, which is occurring in the periphery, and usually that involves the rods. Rods के लिए it's mainly the convergence that we're using. But in case of the fovea, where we have the maximum concentration of your cones, we're going to see something known as the 1:1 transaction. मतलब एक cone is going to activate one bipolar cell, and that's going to activate one ganglion cell. Okay, so there is no convergence over here. So now we move on to your color vision now. अभी हमने देखा कोन्स का हायर थ्रेशोल्ड है, बट दे हैव हायर सेंस ऑफ ग्रेटर एक्यूटी, दैट्स वेयर रिस्पांसिबल फॉर योर फोटोपिक विजन. ऑलराइट. एंड एक इंटरमीडिएट रेंज ऑफ योर स्टिमुलस है, दैट्स नोन एज ए मेसोपिक विजन. ठीक है, मतलब इंटरमीडिएट है, दैट्स नोन एज ए ट्वाइलाइट जिसे हम कहते हैं. तो ट्वाइलाइट वाले टाइम पे इट्स बोथ डार्क एज वेल एज योर लाइट. तो उस केस में दोनों का इंटरमीडिएट रेंज का यूज होएगा. Rods as well, cones, both of them are active. In case of daylight, it's mainly the cones which are active because rods जो है सब के सब bleach हो जाएंगे. ठीक है, right. All right. So we have something known as the Purkinje shift phenomena as well. इसका मतलब क्या है? We have something known as hues. So let me just tell you something about hues now. So what is this hue? Hue is the aspect of color allowing it to be assigned in a position on a color spectrum. So whenever I use the word color spectrum, तो कहाँ पे हमारा hue है, that is known, मतलब क्या उस जो color है उसका actual color क्या है? Whether it could be red, but what is that hue of that red, right? So that is known as its hue, वो aspect of color है. When I mean by the saturation is कि कितना dilution of hue है by white. ठीक है. So this is more saturated as compared to this. So this is less saturation. Okay. So when I use the word hue, and we have something known as the Purkinje shift phenomena, that means hues जो हैं, they change with change in light intensity. What do I mean by that is, as intensity increases, as you go to your photopic vision, the spectral colors they shift towards blue wavelength. Okay, they shift towards blue and yellow. At lower intensity, जो हमारा red green is going to predominate. That makes sense. Okay. As you saw, we have something known as scotopic vision. Moonlight के case में we might have mesopic vision, and then we have your photopic vision. But just don't forget a Purkinje shift phenomena, जिसमें blue और yellow के case में spectral colors are going to shift towards that as compared to your red and green, which are going to predominate in case of your lower intensities of light. That's your scotopic vision. Okay, that's a Purkinje shift phenomena. What is this trichromacy theory? Trichromacy theory for color was given by Young Helmholtz. We also call it as the Young Helmholtz theory. Okay, what do I mean by that is कि in case trichromacy का मतलब ये है, we basically have three colors, three हमारे cone pigments हैं. We have red, we have green and we have blue. ठीक है, RGB for short. ठीक है. So what do I mean by that is trichromacy का मतलब ये है, by modulating these cones we can produce any color. ठीक है. So the extent to which each of the cone types is excited is coded and transmitted to the primary visual cortex, which combine and process these inputs to produce that amount of specific color. But हमारे पास main ingredients हमारे red, green and blue की हैं. Okay, so that is the trichromacy theory, and we discussed about the different cones as well. Now the very important thing is the genes involved. Rhodopsin के लिए it's not that important, but it's chromosome number 3. But super important is for red and green. So red and green sensitive cones, they're basically they're mainly transcribed by your X chromosome. Okay, that is why red-green color blindness is much more common in case of males as compared to females. Okay, and what about the blue sensitive ones? The blue sensitive S pigment जो है S cone pigment है, that is transmitted by your chromosome number 7. Okay. However, I would say red green is much more common as compared as a cause of color blindness as compared to your blue. Blue is very small. Okay. All right. Now we're going to use some terms now in case of color blindness. Now let's see. We can have something known as your achromatopsia. We can have something known as dyschromatopsia. All right. What is this achromatopsia? That also means rod monochromatism. This case में it's true color blindness. मतलब there are no cones. Okay. There are no cones and hence you're going to suffer from day blindness. ठीक है. What was night blindness known as nyctalopia? What is day blindness known as? That's known as hemeralopia. ठीक है. तो achromatopsia पे there are no cone pigments. Only there is rod. So that's why it's known as rod monochromatism. ठीक है. What about dyschromatopsia? मतलब something is defective. So let's see what is defective. Either we can have anomalous trichromatic color vision. मतलब it's not absent, but it's only defective. That's known as anomalous. What about your dyschromatic color vision? Dyschromatic में something is absent. So it's the faculty to perceive one color is completely absent. So either it is protonopia, deuteranopia or tritonopia. So what do I mean by proto? That's red. Deutero is green and your trito is blue. When I mean by proto anomalous, it's only कि red जो spectrum है वो कम perceive हो रहा है. It is getting perceived. ठीक है. Same goes for deutero anomalous and your trito anomalous. Then your dichromatic vision, dichromatic color vision का मतलब ये है we only have two pigments and one is gone. ठीक है. तो एक पूरा कलर को ही हम नहीं ऑब्जर्व कर पा रहे हैं. दैट इज द वर्ड वी यूज फॉर प्रोटोनोपिया, ड्यूटेरोनोपिया एंड ट्राइटोनोपिया. as I guys told you, red green color deficiency is much more common as compared to blue deficiency, whether it be a anomalous vision or whether it is your anopic vision, right? So now, what are the tests that we use? Basically, we have the pseudo isochromatic charts, which are the Ishihara plates, okay, and we have the Hardy-Rand-Ritter plates. So these are known as your pseudo isochromatic charts. All right. Then we have the Edridge Green Lantern test. So that's one test that we use for. This is the instrument that we have. Then we have the Farnsworth Munsell 100 hue test. This is the most sensitive. इसमें actually 100 hues कहते हैं ऐसे, but it only has 85 hue caps. So that's an important MCQ in case of ophthalmology. ठीक है? 100 नाम है उसका, but that doesn't mean it has 100 caps. It has 85 hue caps. Then we have the City University color vision test. Okay, the City University color vision test, and then we have the Holmgrens Wool test. Okay, so these are different color tests that we use in clinics to test your color vision. All right. Now, what is this opponent's process theory? Opponent's process theory is very important for your many of the illusions that we see. Okay, sometimes we see कि जब भी कोई भी whenever we see a picture, and कई बारी what do we see is we see an after image of that picture. So that is due to the opponent's process theory. ठीक है? So what do I mean by that is कि जो red and green cells हैं, ठीक है, they're going to compete against each other. The blue and yellow cells are going to compete against each other, and the black and white cells are going to compete against each other. तो opponent हैं वो, एक दूसरे के opponents हैं वो, ठीक है? Just remember, हमने yellow color कभी नहीं पढ़ा था, but yellow actually means it's a blue, जो blue yellow component है, it's like blue cones compared to combined information from the red and green cones. So it's like red and green cones is actually yellow, okay? And we're comparing it with your blue. So these are the opponent process theory. It explains the phenomena of a negative after image that we see, okay? So whenever one member of the color pair is fatigued by extended inspection, inhibition of its corresponding pair member is reduced. And that is when we close our eyes and then we're going to see the after image. जो हमारा process, जो हमारा दूसरा aspect of the color was getting inhibited, that's going to express itself now. Okay, right? So now we're going to discuss something about your on and off center neurons. I've been seeing some MCQs regarding this in physiology as well. So what are these on and off center neurons? An on center neuron is we have something known as a receptive field, है ना? ये एक receptor की क्या होती है? एक receptive field होती है जिसके अंदर whenever you provide it stimulus, it's going to fire an action potential or a graded potential, ठीक है? So what is known as an on center ganglion cell? An on center ganglion cell is whenever light is applied to that portion of the ganglion cell जो कि उसका photoreceptive field है, it's going to fire an action potential. When we're talking about ganglion cells, it's going to be action potential. What is an off-center ganglion cell? Off-center ganglion cell का मतलब ये है, whenever there is a dark spot in the center, then it's going to fire an action potential. Why do we need all of this? We need this to perform contrast. Okay? Whenever I'm going to draw something black, right? So if I'm going to draw something here, so if this is the portion that is black of that image, and this is the portion that's white of that image, I need to distinguish these margins, right? So these margins are actually being perceived by us due to these on and off center neurons. Okay? So whenever I have the bipolar cell, मान लो, if this is the ganglion cell here, and the ganglion cell मान लो is an on center neuron. So whenever there is light in an on center neuron, it's going to fire an action potential. Okay? What about an off center? अगर light पड़ेगी off center पे, it's not going to fire an action potential. Okay? What about there is no light in case of off, then it's going to fire an action potential. And whenever there is no light in case of on, it's not going to fire an action potential. So that is the thing. All right. So we discussed about the on-center ganglion cells and we discussed about the off-center ganglion cells. Just remember, जो हमारे off-center ganglion cells है, they're more numerous. And why is that? Because nature में, due to natural selection, we see more what? We see more natural visual scenes which have darker edges as compared to lighter edges. Okay, that's the main thing. All right. So right. So now we move on to your retinal ganglion cells. Actually, I wanted to cover about your center and surround principle as well. थोड़ा सा टाइम मैंने ज़्यादा ओवरशूट कर दिया, and I'm going to talk about your retinal ganglion cells proper. ठीक है? So retinal ganglion cells, when we talk about, we have two types of ganglion cells. We have the P cells that stands for your parvocellular or your midget ganglion cells, or we can have the M cells that stands for your magnocellular or your alpha cells. ठीक है? Also known as the parasol cells. So what do I mean by that? This parvocellular pathway, जो भी है, ganglion cells जो भी हैं, they're present in the retina. ठीक है? These parvocellular ganglion cells are also present in the retina. So these parvocellular ganglion cells present in the retina, they're going to present to the LGN, that is a lateral geniculate nucleus. But this lateral geniculate nucleus actually has 6 layers. So let's see that. So it has 6 layers. Okay? So the parvocellular neurons जो भी हैं, parvocellular ganglion cells, they're going to present 3, 4, 5 and 6. Outermost जो भी हमारी 3, 4, 5 and 6 जो भी हमारी layers हैं of the lateral geniculate nucleus, उसको ये present करेंगे. ठीक है? And what is the role of the parvo? The parvocellular ganglion cells are the ones which are going to be responsible for our color vision, a very important MCQ. Okay? So parvocellular are the one which is responsible for our color vision. What about the magnocellular pathway? The magnocellular pathway is going to synapse with the innermost two layers, that is the layer 1 and layer 2 of the lateral geniculate nucleus. Okay, and what are they responsible for? They're mainly responsible for movement, they're responsible for depth, they're responsible for flicker, rapid pathway basically. So that's a magnocellular and a parvocellular. Okay, so all of them are going to occur in the optic tract and the optic chiasm. Okay, I hope that's clear. You have the P cells and you have the M cells. Just remember, P cells are the ones which are going to be sensitive to color stimulus, where M cells are going to be the ones which are going to be mainly a black and white stimulus, but they're highly sensitive to a rapid movement. So whenever I see someone running and whenever कोई भी patient है वगैरह he's not able to perceive motion, then I'm going to suspect कि भाई M cells या magnocellular pathway is the one which is going to be defective. Okay, which is projecting where to the innermost two layers of the lateral geniculate nucleus. Okay, so that's the lateral your ganglion cells. All right. So here I have something about your vision now कि actually होता कैसे है, and we know. So let's see, let's assume like there is a left visual field and there's a right visual field. Just remember हमारी eye में there is a left right inversion as well. ठीक है, and there is upper and lower inversion as well. What do I mean by that is upper and lower inversion भी है, left and inversion भी है. मतलब मान लो if this is your left visual field, try to close your right eye and try to visualize कि आपका left visual field है, and then divide that visual field into different components. You can have an upper component, a lower component, then you can have a medial component, and you can have a lateral component. Okay, what do I mean by this inversion is this lateralmost portion of your left visual field is going to be projected to the nasal hemiretina. Do you follow? The lateral portion है हमारा left visual field का, that's going to present to the medial one and nasal hemiretina, and your जो medial portion है of your left visual field is going to present to your temporal hemiretina. So what is happening? There's a left right inversion, but things are not simple as that as well. What's going to happen is there's going to be an upright inversion as well, up and down inversion. मतलब अगर left upper quadrant की अगर हम बात करें, left है, that's going to be the temporal aspect of a left visual field. It's going to go to the nasal portion, that's fine. But upper है, again it's going to invert and it's going to go into your down portion. ठीक है, so try to process all of this, what is happening. ठीक है, so why do I mean to tell you all of this thing is we know कि हमारे जो nasal fibers जो हैं, ठीक है, if these are the nasal fibers, nasal hemiretina पे जो fire कर रहे हैं, which are corresponding to your temporal field, they are the ones which are going to cross. ठीक है, whereas your temporal hemiretina जो है उसके uncrossed fibers होते हैं and they're going to go into your lateral geniculate nucleus. और अभी हमने पढ़ा we have the two पहले innermost two layers that's going to go for the magnocellular neurons and your 3, 4, 5, 6 are going to go for the parvocellular neurons. ठीक है, बट एक और यहाँ पे एक्सेप्शन एक और चीज है, दैट्स टेम्पोरल फाइबर्स जो भी हैं. ठीक है, सो दीज आर द मान लो टेम्पोरल फाइबर्स फ्रॉम एनी ऑप्टिक द ऑप्टिक नर्व. दिस टेम्पोरल फाइबर्स फ्रॉम द रेटिना आर गोइंग टू प्रोजेक्ट ओनली टू लेयर्स 2, 3 and 5. ठीक है, सो यहाँ पे दो चीजें हो रही है. So these temporal fibers are going to project to low 2, 3 and 5, and your nasal fibers are going to project to your 1, 4 and 6. Okay, so let's just see an example. For example, you can see what do I mean by that is कि when I want a magnocellular here, ठीक है, मान लो आई एम सेइंग कि हमारे लेफ्ट अपर क्वाड्रेंट में देयर इज अ मैग्नोसेलुलर पाथवे एंड आई सी इट्स गोइंग टू क्रॉस एंड गो टू द नेजल हेमिरेटिना, दैट्स फाइन. बट आई एम सीइंग कि जो नेजल हेमिरेटिना वाले फाइबर्स हैं, वेयर आर दे गोइंग टू गो? they're going to go where? This is going to go at synapse at your layers 1, 4 and 6. ठीक है, so 1, 4 and 6. But if I am considering a magnocellular neuron, I know magnocellular are only layers 1 and 2. ठीक है, so actually what is happening is we are eliminating the 2 and we are going ahead with the 1. ठीक है, so अगर लेफ्ट साइड का अगर magnocellular neuron है, that's going to project only to the contralateral first layer of the LGN. So try to follow all of this up. ठीक है, it's very fascinating, you can see all of this up. But later on I will turn your attention to something known as the optic radiations. As you can see here कि जैसे हमारा यहाँ पे हमारा optic chiasm है and हमने यहाँ पे crossing over पढ़ ली of the nasal fibers that originate from the nasal hemiretina. अभी next we are having the LGN, that is a lateral geniculate nucleus, and we discuss इसके जो भी laminations हैं. The inner 2 are for your magnocellular, and your 3, 4, 5, 6 are for your parvocellular neurons. Magnocellular neurons are mainly for your movement, and your parvocellular neurons are mainly for your color vision. ठीक है. Now, from the lateral geniculate nucleus, we need to go to the cortex. ठीक है. And this is what LGN is actually a part of a thalamus. ठीक है. So whenever thalamus से हमें cortex की तरफ जाना है, we take the aid of something known as what? We take the aid of radiations. ठीक है. These are known as thalamic radiations. And what are these thalamic radiations? If you see here, so this is the thalamus और हमें कहाँ आना है? पीछे की तरफ जाना है, to the occipital cortex, जहाँ पे हमारा primary visual cortex है. So what thalamic radiation will it be? Obviously, it's going to be the posterior thalamic radiation. So that is why they're known as optic radiations. From the LGN, we need to go to the occipital cortex. We go via the posterior thalamic radiations. And where are they going to lie? Somewhere here, we have something known as the internal capsule. Okay? So we have the caudate nucleus over here. We have the thalamus over here. एंड यहाँ पे हमारा योर पुटमेन इन ग्लोबस पैलेडिस आर देयर. तो ये जो हमारा जो ये इंटरनल कैप्सूल है, इसकी पोस्टीरियर थैलामिक रेडिएशंस में वी नो द ऑक्सीपिटल जो हमारे ऑप्टिक रेडिएशन है दे आर रनिंग. ठीक है. एंड ऑप्टिक रेडिएशंस भी हमारे दो टाइप के हैं. वी हैव द बॉम्स लूप, वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, एंड वी हैव द मायर्स लूप. ठीक है. व्हाई डू आई मीन, क्यों मैं बताने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ? Because this Bohm's loop is actually carrying your inferior visual field. I've incorrectly labeled it, but Bohm's loop is carrying your inferior visual field, where a Myers loop is carrying your superior visual fields. Okay? This Myers loop is going to run in the temporal lobe. Okay? So just remember, in case of stroke, we're going to suffer from something known as contralateral superior quadrantopsia, whereas the Myers, ये जो हमारा Bohm's loop है, that's going to run in the parietal cortex, just immediately beneath it. ठीक है, पीछे की तरफ जो जाएगा. ठीक है. So this is just some food for thought, and we can discuss all of these as well. Now, let me just tell you something about the pupillary light reflex. Time short hai, तो इस करके we are not going to go into that much of detail. So let's discuss about the pupillary light reflex as well. तो यहाँ पे हमारा afferent आ रहा है. We have the retina, and इसमें we have the optic nerve. ठीक है. Now what's going to happen is it's going to cross, obviously. What's happening is the optic chiasm वगैरह के through जाएगा. But just before, if you guys know that when it's running in the optic tract वाला portion, it's going to give a branch to your pretectal nucleus. So we are discussing at that portion how is the light reflex mediated. Okay. So what's happening? There is the optic nerve 2. It's going to activate your pretectal nucleus. इस side का भी, and it's going to activate the opposite side का. It's going to activate your pretectal nucleus. This pretectal nucleus is going to activate its ipsilateral Edinger-Westphal nucleus as well as your contralateral Edinger-Westphal nucleus, and that is the reason why कि जो हमारे pupillary reflexes हैं, we can have both direct pupillary reflex as well, and we can have consensual pupillary reflex as well. ठीक है. So the cranial nerve 2, optic nerve, synapsing of the pretectal nucleus. The pretectal nucleus is going to stimulate its ipsilateral Edinger-Westphal as well as your contralateral Edinger-Westphal. Okay. This Edinger-Westphal nucleus is actually carrying the preganglionic parasympathetic nerve fibers. Okay. So now it needs a ganglion. That's a ciliary ganglion. So the next is going to synapse to the ciliary ganglion, be carried by the oculomotor nerve, that's cranial nerve 3, to the ciliary sphincter. So whenever we have light coming in, the ciliary sphincter is going to contract, and we're going to see meiosis. Okay. So that is, and अगर एक light अगर left eye में लग रही है, then obviously opposite side का भी what's going to happen is opposite side का Edinger-Westphal is also getting stimulated, and we're going to see the contralateral consensual light reflex as well. ठीक है. So this is all about the pupillary light reflex pathway as well. All right. ठीक है. So primary visual cortex की अगर हम बात करें, it's mainly area number 70. That's your striate cortex जिसे हम कहते हैं, and mainly is lying in the calcarine fissure on the medial occipital cortex. So that's important. ठीक है. Medial occipital cortex पे when we take a sagittal view of the brain, the medial occipital cortex पे along the calcarine fissure we have something known as the primary visual cortex, that is area number 17. ठीक है. And उसके आसपास जो भी है, that is the secondary visual cortices, that's your area number 18 and 19. ठीक है. That's the parastriate cortex. The striate cortex is mainly your primary visual cortex. And just like a normal cortex, it's going to have 6 layers. ठीक है. 6 layers इसमें present होंगे. All right. ठीक है. So whatever जो भी हमारे LGN वाले न्यूरॉन्स हो, या हमारे जो चाहे वो पावोसेलुलर न्यूरॉन्स हो, चाहे वो मैग्नोसेलुलर न्यूरॉन्स हो, the पावोसेलुलर as well as the magnocellular are going to go to layer 4C. ठीक है. बस this is the MCQ. 4C पे वो प्रोजेक्ट करेंगे into all of these 6 layers of your the cortex. That's your striate cortex. ठीक है. Now, right. So now we're going to discuss about your something known as dark adaptation, and we have something known as light adaptation. So what is light adaptation is कि whenever you have bright light for hours, right? So all of these photochemicals are reduced to your transretinal and opsin जो भी हमने पढ़ा, and much of that transretinal is converted into vitamin A. So you're going to have a reduced concentration of photochemicals, and hence there's going to be reduced sensitivity of the light to light. जितना जितना आप light, bright light को stimulate करोगे, for that amount of the same stimulus, you won't get the same amount of response, because इतनी ज़्यादा bright light में all of these photochemicals will be bleached and getting converted to all transretinol. ठीक है? So that is known as the chemical mechanism of a light adaptation. ठीक है? And then we can have the dark adaptation as well. For example, if you move on to a bright sunny morning, and now you go to a cinema hall. So उस case में you're going to have something with the dark adaptation kicking in that takes approximately 20 minutes to it all to complete. तो इसमें क्या है? This process refers to the gradual increase in light sensitivity of the retina when in low light conditions. Why? Because आप अभी dark पे, अभी light पे थे, you have underwent light adaptation, all of your photochemicals have been basically destroyed. Now you want to regenerate all of those photochemicals back into your cis retinol. So uska process is known as your dark adaptation. Okay? So in the dark, the photopigments broken down during light exposure are gradually regenerated 4 times as rapidly as cones, in cones as in rods. However, the cones have 30 to 300 times less sensitivity than the rods, so that makes up for it. Okay? So in the dark adapted state, primarily rod vision is operative. and thus visual acuity is low, as we talked about it, है ना? Visual acuity for the rods as compared to the cones is very significantly less, and colors भी वो distinguish नहीं कर पाता था, ठीक है? Right. So it has two phases. पहले अभी हमने देखा the cones are the ones which are going to adapt very fast, ठीक है? They're fast operating as compared to your rods. But जो हमारा main dark adaptation में जो role play कर रहा है, that's mainly your rods. So we have two phases. The first 5 minutes में the cones are going to adapt, and later on till the 20 minutes we're going to have the rod adaptation as well. So this is known as your dark adaptation. Right. So now we're going to have hearing now. ठीक है? So mechanism hearing की अभी हम बात करते हैं, ठीक है? So just for example, we have your sound waves coming over here, and this is your tympanic membrane. As you have studied in ENT, जब हमारा tympanic membrane जो है, उसका central portion does not oscillate. Mainly it is the paracentral portion. So the paracentral portion of the tympanic membrane is one is going to vibrate. Now you are going to have the three ear ossicles. You have the malleus, incus, and the stapes. ठीक है? Just remember, if you see here, यहाँ पे incus का process देखो, long process, and you see the malleus का head. The malleus ka head is significantly more longer than your incus ka short process. So that is something known as a mechanical advantage. Okay? So it's a lever action of the ossicles. The handle of the malleus is 1.3 times longer than the long process of the incus, and that's going to play a very important role in something known as your amplification of sound. Okay? What do I mean by that is whenever I have water over here and I have air. So whenever sound is going from one medium, which is a considerably lesser dense medium, into a more dense medium, what's going to happen is all of that sound is going to get reflected away at this interface. But we don't need that. हमें चाहिए हम इतनी ज़्यादा sound को amplify करें that even if some of it gets reflected away, some of it at least conducts through itself to the fluid. When I mean by the fluid is जो भी हमारे सारे के सारे processes हो रहे हैं in the inner ear, that is mainly happening in fluid, whether it is with the endolymph or the perilymph. ठीक है? तो उस fluid को move कराने के लिए sound waves through it, we need amplification of that sound, वरना सारी की हमारी जो sound है, that's going to get reflected away from that interface. तो उस process को we call it as impedance matching, and one of the players in that impedance matching is these ossicles. Handle of the malleus is 1.3 times longer than your long process of your incus, so that provides a mechanical advantage, and that's known as the lever action of your ossicles. Okay, that's fine. All right. So what is known as impedance matching? We know the cochlear fluid usually offers impedance, which would have led to reflection of the air conducted sound. So now to prevent this, the middle ear converts sound of greater amplitude but lesser force to that of lesser amplitude but greater force. Okay. And how does it do that? Either by the lever action of the ossicle, that's going to provide mechanical advantage of 1.3. And what about the hydraulic action of the TM? When I mean by the hydraulic action, you see over here. Okay. So what is this? ये हमारे stapes foot plate है, and this is हमारा tympanic membrane. Can you see the disparity between them? ये कितना बड़ा है and this ये कितना छोटा है. So hydraulic action of the TM is that the area of the tympanic membrane is much larger than the area of the stapes foot plate. ठीक है? Actually this ratio was 21:1. ठीक है? But tympanic membrane का अभी हमने क्या कहा कि पूरा portion does not vibrate. So we take something known as the effective vibratory area, which is 2/3 of your 90. ठीक है? So जो हमारा effective aerial ratio आएगा, that's going to be 17:1 as compared to your 21:1. 21:1 हमारा तब आता अगर हम पूरे tympanic membrane का पूरा एरिया लेते, but we are not taking the full area because all of that will not contract, all of that will not oscillate or basically vibrate. Only the paracentral portion is going to do so. ठीक है? अब now we calculate something with the total transformer ratio जब हम इन दोनों को multiply कर देंगे. ठीक है? That's your 1.3 times 17, and that gives you total transformer ratio of 22.1. This is a very important MCQ. ठीक है? What is the transformation ratio? It's 22.1. ठीक है? All right. And now we have something known as the phase differential as well. This is going to play a role in your ENT classes. Okay, when you're going to discuss something known as your acute otitis media. In this case, you're going to study your membrane perforation. जब आपका tympanic membrane perforate कर जाएगा, and the question goes like this: कि is the patient going to hear better when there's going to be fluid in the air, or is the patient going to feel better when the air is dry? Okay, those case में just remember this very important phenomena known as the phase differential. ठीक है? उस case में we call it as a round window shielding effect. ठीक है? That's also known as the baffle effect. ठीक है? So that is known as the baffle effect, the round window shielding effect. But अभी वो नहीं discuss करें हम. We're discussing the phase differential. What happens is the sound waves striking the TM do not reach the oval window and the round window simultaneously. You understand? अगर आप air के through conduction लेके आ रहे हो and आप कुछ solid surface के through conduction लेके आ रहे हो, ठीक है? What's going to conduct faster? Obviously the solid one. What do I mean by that is अगर मैं यहाँ पे मेरी round window है, this is my oval window. If this is going to get conducted through solid and this is going to conduct it through air, which is going to reach first? Obviously, this is going to reach first. If both of them were to reach at the same time, what would have happened is यहाँ से हमारा sound जाता, यहाँ से हमारा sound जाता, they would have caught themselves at the same time, and यहाँ पे हमारा sound dissipate हो जाता. We don't want that. We need a slight delay. ठीक है, and that slight delay or your phase differential is basically mediated by this phenomenon. ठीक है, so what is this phase differential again? If the sound waves were to strike both the windows simultaneously, they would have cancelled each other out, and hence there would have been no movement of the labyrinth. So this whole portion is going to contribute only when the 4 decibels, when the tympanic membrane is intact. But when the tympanic membrane is not intact, that's your round window shield effect, that's your baffle effect, that's going to contribute much more. Okay, right. Just remember the natural resonance EAC की 3000, middle ear की 800, TM की 800 से लेके 1600 and ossicles के case में 500 से लेके 2000 hertz. Why do I keep on emphasizing that is if you observe 500 से लेके range हमारी 3000 तक है. So the greatest sensitivity of sound transmission is between your 500 से लेके 3000. Much close to your 2000 से लेके 3000 because वहाँ पे हमारी speech frequencies are the ones which are getting represented. All right. So now we are on the membranous labyrinth. As हमें पता है, when we divide the cochlea, we're going to see this thing. We have bisected the cochlea. What are we seeing? We are seeing 3 compartments. We are seeing the scala vestibuli, we are seeing the scala media, and we are seeing the scala tympani. Okay? So we have the scala vestibuli, we have the scala media, and the scala media and your scala tympani. Okay? The scala media is mainly contains something known as your endolymph, and these rays, that's your the scala vestibuli and your scala tympani, are going to contain something known as your perilymph. Okay? Okay? Just remember, जो हमारे scala vestibuli and your scala tympani, they're going to meet again बाद में जाके in the periphery, and that portion of meeting is known as your helicotrema. ठीक है? तो यहाँ पे क्या है? We have the cochlear duct and this is the cochlea. It is surrounded by a bony labyrinth और उसमें से one portion is the scala vestibuli, one portion is the scala tympani, and बीच में you have the cochlear duct which is nothing but your scala media. ठीक है? And how are they separated from each other is scala vestibuli and scala media को there is something under the Reisner's membrane separating it, whereas scala media and your scala tympani को there is something under the basilar membrane separating it. ठीक है? So this is the basilar membrane, this is the Reisner's membrane, and इसके ऊपर we have something under the tectorial membrane. ठीक है? So ये जो हमारा पूरा पोर्शन है यहाँ पे, that's a tectorial membrane over here. We have the basilar membrane over here. ठीक है? What else? We can see one inner hair cell. That's your inner hair cell, and if you see, there's only one row of inner hair cells. So that's going to be significant. Then we can see multiple 2 से लेके 3 rows of your outer hair cells. ठीक है? We might see something known as the tunnel of corti. Can you see it? यहाँ पे क्या होता है? We have something known as pillar cells. And these pillar cells के बीच में जो tunnel बनेगा, that's known as the tunnel of corti. We don't actually know इसके पीछे reason क्या है, but this whole mechanism is known as the organ of corti. What is that? We have the tectorial membrane, and what is this organ of corti resting upon? It's resting upon the basilar membrane. We see the scala media, we see the scala tympani, we see the scala vestibuli. This is the basilar membrane, this is your Reisner's membrane. Okay? One more thing that I would like to tell you is perilymph दोनों साइड पे अगर आप उसका पोटेंशियल देखोगे that's 0 millivolts. ठीक है? But in the scala media it has plus 80 millivolts का electrotronic potential. Okay? It's going to be more positive, plus 80 millivolts. Now, how does that happen? We're going to discuss that. Okay? And this potential is actually known as the endocochlear potential. Okay? So this potential is known as the endocochlear potential. That's plus 80 millivolts. Okay? Right. So now, what is the endocochlear potential and how is it mediated by? So the pura ka pura jo credit hai, that goes to something known as the stria vascularis. So the stria vascularis actually has these special, I would say, electrogenic potassium pumps. Okay? So what is it going to do? Let me just make it. So it's going to pump out potassium. Okay? Lots and lots of potassium inside the scala media. Yeah? So the scala media is resembling your intercellular volume as well. Okay? Is resembling your intercellular fluid. So बहुत सारे potassium channels हैं यहाँ पे. Some people say it's the NKCC2 transporter, whereas others would argue that it is some special electrogenic potassium pump. So you can see whatever is the option, you can tick that. Okay? So this is how the electrotronic potential is generated, and this is the potassium that is leaving out from all of these layers of the stria vascularis, and it's contributing to your plus 80 millivolts, which is present in the scala media. And what is that known as? That's known as the endocochlear potential. Okay? So again, the endocochlear potential is plus 80 millivolts of endocochlear potential exists between the endolymph, this is the endolymph, and your perilymph, with positivity inside the scala media due to what? Due to high potassium, which is secreted by your stria vascularis. And this is the stria vascularis. Either it's a NKCC2 transporter or it is a special electrogenic potassium pump. Okay? So this is the organ of corti. Let's see the cells. As I was telling you, these is the tunnel of corti, which is formed by the pillar cells. So ये pillar cells हैं, इनके दोनों के बीच में have the tunnel of corti, and it contains corticolymph. Okay? Cortilymph. Then what is this? This is your inner hair cells, and these are your outer hair cells. As you can see, inner hair cell के 1 row है, outer hair cells के 3 rows है. Then you might have, what is this? This is the basilar membrane. What is this? There is the Reisner's membrane. And what is this? This is known as the tectorial membrane. Okay. If you see on the hair cells, you have these cilia. These are known as stereocilia. Okay. Stereocilia. Now, important MCQ यहाँ पे ये है that the cochlea, actually, if you remember, we studied something under the kinocilium, but the cochlea does not have any kinocilium. All right, it doesn't have any kinocilium. तो जब हम इसके बारे में organ of Corti के बारे में पढ़ेंगे, we always study कि whenever the stereocilia move towards the tallest stereocilia, or we call it गलती से हम ये कह देते हैं towards the kinocilium, but actually there is no kinocilium inside the organ of Corti or on these hair cells. There's only a tallest stereocilia. So whenever the shorter ones are going to move towards the tallest ones, we're going to see depolarization. And let's study about all of that as well. Okay? So just remember, minus 70 millivolts is occurring inside the hair cells. Okay? This is the endolymph. Okay? ये सारा का सारा क्या है? This is the endolymph. So this, imagine this. Minus 70 is here. Scala media में कितना है? It's plus 80 millivolts. Can you see the amount of potential difference is there? That's about 150 millivolts. So 150 millivolts की potential difference के through, all of that potassium is going to rush inside the hair cells. So this is one of the very few conditions जहाँ पे potassium is actually the one which is mediating your depolarization. We studied about sodium, we studied about your calcium. But इस case में it's mainly potassium. ठीक है? All right. ठीक है? So stereocilia is there, but there are no kinocilium is not present. RMP है minus 70 का है, और यहाँ पे perilymph is at 0. The endolymph is plus 80. This is your minus 70, and your potential difference is of 150 millivolts. Some difference between your inner hair cells and your outer hair cells. Inner hair cells के case में it's 1 row. Outer hair cells के case में 3 to 4 rows. Inner hair cells के case में it's 3500, the amount that I'm saying. Outer hair cells के it's mainly 12,000. Inner hair cells are more resistant to damage by your ototoxic drug or noise, whereas your outer hair cells are more easily damaged by your ototoxic drugs and noise. Try to remember it as जो आपके पास कम है, you don't want to lose that. So you have less amount of rows of inner hair cells, you have less amount of inner hair cells, that is 3500, so they have to be resistant. Okay? Inner hair cells का structure is more flask shaped, and your outer hair cells का structure is more cylindrical shaped. Okay? So what are the mechanotransduction? What happens actually is, so let me just tell you in brief. So यहाँ पे हमारे दो pivot points हैं. Okay? So this is the basilar membrane and this is your tectorial membrane. एक ये pivot point है और एक ये pivot point है. Because these two pivot points are actually different. ठीक है? ये अलग-अलग points पे located है. So what's going to happen is whenever this basilar membrane either moves up or it moves down, what's going to happen is in दोनों membranes के बीच में there's going to be shearing force. ठीक है? And this shearing force is going to be the one that's going to bend the stereocilia, either towards the tallest one or away from the tallest one. If it is towards the tallest one, we're going to see depolarization. And if it is away from the tallest one, we're going to see inhibition. That's your hyperpolarization. Okay? So this is the thing that I'm talking about. कि whenever there is upward phase जब भी होगा, upward phase of the basilar membrane that I'm saying. So यहाँ पे sound waves आती हैं, they transverse here. They reach the scala tympani. वो scala tympani का ये bulge create करेंगे upward ऊपर की तरफ से, and that's going to make the basilar membrane move up. What's that going to lead to? That's going to generate a shearing force, but against towards the tallest stereocilia, and hence it's going to provide depolarization. And the exact opposite, however, will always happen. Just remember, sound wave, if we say, is a sine wave. Okay? So just remember, upward deflection B is going to cause something, downward deflection is going to be cause something. दोनों are being transduced and perceived as your some specific frequency of sound. Okay? So दोनों के दोनों होंगे. We're going to have depolarization as well as hyperpolarization. Okay? It depends upon whether the basilar membrane is moving up or down. If it is moving up, it's depolarization. And if it is moving down, then it's hyperpolarization. Okay? Why was this happening? Due to the different pivot points that is in case of your tectorial membrane and your basilar membrane. Right? Okay? So how is all of this mediated again? Your just stereocilia hai, it has something known as a tip links. Okay? So these are your connecting joints which are known as your tip links. And what does these tip links do is, यहाँ पे हमारा एक channel है. Okay? Sorry. We have these channel present on the stereocilia के surface पे, and this tip links in the one which are connecting it. How are they connecting it? Mechanically. So it's a mechanically gated channel. Why are we so reluctant in using mechanically gated channels? Because sound को perceive करना is very important for us. We need to be as quick as possible. Okay? So what is the quickest thing? Then motion actually. If we rely on something known as a neurotransmitter, या कोई ion आएगा यहाँ पे bind करेगा ligand gated channels और inotropic और metabotropic receptor, it's going to take some time. ठीक है? It's going to take some time. But in this case, it's because it's mechanically gated via these tip links. So what's going to happen is, whenever it's going to fall towards the kinocilium, they've actually labeled it wrong. In case of cochlea, we shouldn't use the word kinocilium. But if it is towards the kinocilium or the stereocilia, what's going to happen is these tip links are going to open these channels. Okay? And what are these channels? These channels are HC-MET channels. What are that? Hair cell mechanotransduction gated channels. Okay? HC-MET. HC-MET. That's a mechanotransduction के लिए HC-MET channels. And what are they going to conduct? Endolymph में आपके पास क्या था ज़्यादा? Yeah, potassium being secreted by the special electrogenic pump and your NKCC2. So the potassium is the one which is going to move inside. So that is the thing. Depolarization यहाँ पे is mediated by potassium coming inside the cell rather than sodium or calcium. The HC met channels are going to open when it's going to go like this. So this is the one. यहाँ पे अब अपनी open state में आ गया HC met and potassium is going to rush inside. Okay? And as soon as potassium rushes inside, it's going to raise the membrane potential. That's going to activate your voltage gated calcium channels. और उसके through calcium is going to come inside. And we know calcium जहाँ पे भी involved है, that's going to lead to exocytosis of the neurotransmitter. और यहाँ पे जो neurotransmitter present है for exciting the bipolar cells of the spiral ganglion, it's mainly glutamate. ठीक है? So how are they better? They do not have any latency. ये जो channels है, they do not have any latency. They do not have any refractory period. They do not show any fatigue. There is no all or none law. So this holds true in case of your hair cells. Okay. So hair cells के case में again we are discussing this is the graded potential and not the action potential. So there is no refractory period. Refractory period की बात ही नहीं होगी. And why do we not need the refractory period? Because जिस amount of stimulus को हमें transduce करना है, it has such high frequencies that refractory period के अगर चक्कर में पड़ेंगे, we won't be able to depict that accurately. Okay? So there is no latency, there is no refractory period, there is no fatigue, there is no all or none law in case of your hair cells. Okay? Now there were two theories actually. How do we perceive your frequencies? So first one was the place and traveling wave theory given by von Bexey, and he was given the Nobel Prize for it. उस बंदे ने सिंपल कहा कि आपके पास बेसला मेम्ब्रेन थी जो आपका was serving as a pivot point. उसने कहा that towards when I make the cochlea like this ना, so this is my base, this is my apex. ठीक है? He said as base पे जो बेसला मेम्ब्रेन है that's more stiff and that's more narrow. ठीक है? और उसने कहा जैसे आप एपेक्स पे जाते हो that's going to become more wide and that's going to become more floppy. ठीक है? Why is this so significant is he said yeah, so as we are seeing यहाँ पे it is narrow and it is stiffer, यहाँ पे it is broader and it is floppier. And what was the thing is उसने कहा जो भी हमारी higher frequency sound है they're going to be represented at the base and your lower frequency sound are going to be represented at your apex. And why is that happening? Due to the relative stiffness and your relative difference in your membrane area of your basilar membrane. ठीक है? तो जहाँ पे हमारा membrane area कम है, पतला है, और जहाँ पे वो stiff है, higher frequency sounds are going to make the maximum amount of amplitude over here and going to dissipate आगे जाके. But the lower frequency sound is not going to make that much of an amplitude over here, but जैसे उसे floppy उसे membrane मिलेगी, it's going to generate an enormous amount of your amplitude. So that's known as a traveling wave theory. कि जितना उसका frequency है, उसके accordingly it's going to be represented at some portion of your basilar membrane, and it actually depends upon कि आपकी frequency कितनी है and where you are resting upon your basilar membrane. So let's just see that. The base of the basilar membrane is tuned for high frequencies and the apex is tuned for your low frequencies. So this is, as you can see, base से चलते हैं, base पे 20,000 hertz, and as you go down the apex and down the apex you reach to your 200 hertz. Okay, so that is Van Bexey ने दी थी, that's the place and traveling wave theory. All right, so you see higher frequencies यहाँ पे maximum amplitude show करी है, and your lower frequencies यहाँ पे कोई amplitude show नहीं किया उन्होंने, but they're showing an amplitude down the line in case of your basilar membrane. ठीक है, so that is the Van Bexey theory. ठीक है, so this is tonotopy. What do I mean by tonotopy is कि every frequency of sound is organized. ठीक है, वो या तो at the level of the basilar membrane it was tonotopy, so this is also known as tonotopy, or when it goes into the cochlear nucleus, वहाँ पे भी हर frequency of sound is going to activate some specific subset of your neurons. So that is known as a tonotopy. And even when we go further into the cortex, as you can see, anterior to posterior अगर आप जाओगे ना, तो anterior cortex, if you look over here, that is your auditory cortex, है ना, superior temporal gyrus में it's present. So this anterior to posterior जब आप move कर रहे हो, your frequency keeps on increasing, so that your lower frequencies are represented more anteriorly and your higher frequencies are represented more posteriorly. So that is known as tonotopy in case of your cochlear nucleus, or it is case of your basilar membrane, or it is the case for your cortex. ठीक है, right? But यहाँ पे बात खत्म नहीं होती है. Actually, there is one more thing that is known as the phase locking principle. So that is another way जिसके through हम ये जो ये frequencies हैं, we can actually determine कि frequency कौन सी frequency है. तो phase locking principle ये कहता है कि for any phase of your action, for any phase of your any stimulus or your sound, कोई भी phase हो, चाहे वो उसका crest हो या उसका trough हो, कुछ भी हो, उसके correspondingly you might have an action potential firing. ठीक है? What do I mean by that is मानो 200 hertz की वो frequency है, तो 200 hertz की ही amplitude या फिर frequency से action potential is being fired by the ganglion cells. So that is known as phase locking. What do I mean by that? A phase locked neuron, if that happens, would fire action potential at the same constant location on the sinusoidal wave of compression and rarefaction. तो हम उसे फेज लॉकिंग कहते हैं. ऐसे ही हमारे पास अगर डिफरेंट डिफरेंट न्यूरॉन्स है विच आर कॉरेस्पॉन्डिंग फॉर डिफरेंट डिफरेंट पोर्शन ऑफ योर साइनोसॉइडल वेव, तो हम क्या जनरेट कर सकते हैं? वी कैन जनरेट अ सेंस ऑफ परसीविंग योर पिच. सो द सेकंड प्रिंसिपल इज योर फेज लॉकिंग प्रिंसिपल. फर्स्ट वन वाज योर प्लेज इन ट्रैवलिंग वेव प्रिंसिपल. ठीक है. एंड नेक्स्ट वी हैव वॉली. वॉली का मतलब ये है जो इंटरमीडिएट फ्रीक्वेंसी साउंड्स हैं, ठीक है, intermediate sound frequencies are represented by the pooled activity of number of neurons, each of which fires in a phase lock manner, which I was telling you about. कि मान लो हमारे पास कोई भी एक साइनोसाइडल वेव है, अलग अलग न्यूरॉन्स आर फायरिंग एट अ स्पेसिफिक पोर्शन ऑफ दैट क्रेस्ट और ट्रफ. मान लो एक न्यूरॉन यहाँ पे फायर करेगा, एक न्यूरॉन यहाँ पे फायर करेगा, यहाँ पे फायर करेगा, वटेवर. तो सबके सब अगर कंबाइन करेंगे, वी आर गोइंग टू परसीव योर पिच. एंड व्हाट इज द प्रिंसिपल नोन एज? दैट इज नोन एज वॉली प्रिंसिपल. We discussed the place and traveling wave theory given by Von Bexey. We discussed the second one, that is your phase locking principle, and now we have already discussed the Wally principle as well. So let's discuss the auditory cortex. Just remember, auditory cortex is all about binaural. ठीक है. So we are having bilateral representation. ठीक है. कैसे होएगा? हमारा कॉक्लिया है, तो कॉक्लिया sends these central axons from the bipolar cells located where in the spiral ganglion. Very important MCQ again, spiral ganglion. ठीक है. कॉक्लिया नर्व के थ्रू ये जा रहे हैं, eighth nerve के थ्रू. So now it's going to go to the cochlea nucleus. We have different portions of the cochlear nucleus. We have the dorsal nucleus, we have the posteroventral nucleus, and we have the introventral nucleus. We don't have to discuss that. तो cochlear nucleus के बाद क्या होएगा? We're going to always see bilateral representation. The ipsilateral superior olive को भी stimulate करेगा, and it's also going to stimulate the opposite side का contralateral superior olive as well. ठीक है? We're going to discuss the superior olive का very function very shortly. But then उसके बाद क्या आएगा? We're going to have the inferior colliculus, and then we're going to have the medial geniculate body, and ultimately we're going to have area 41, 42 on the superior aspect of your temporal lobe. That is your auditory cortex. How do I remember is via this mnemonic which I studied in ENT, that is E. coli. That is your auditory pathway summarized. You go for your 8th part, distal and your proximal portion of your 8th nerve. Then you go for your cochlear nucleus. This is your olive, that is your superior olive. Then we have the E. coli. Okay. Then we have the we call it as the lateral lemniscus. Actually, I forgot. So the white tract that carry all of these stimulus is known as the lateral lemniscus. Then we have the inferior colliculus. Then we have the medial geniculate body. Remember, the lateral geniculate body faces the optic pathway, and we have the auditory cortex. Okay. So all of this is known as your auditory pathway. So why are these olives? इतने बारे में क्यों concern कर रहा हूँ? So एक और चीज, that is regarding the potentials which are there in the hearing mechanism. So we can have something known as the hair receptor potentials. ठीक है? हेयर रिसेप्टर पोटेंशियल्स में वी कैन हैव दो टाइप ऑफ पोटेंशियल्स. वन आर योर कॉन्टिन्यूस कंपोनेंट, जो हमारा साउंड एनवेलप है, जो कि पूरा बैकग्राउंड नॉइज जिसे हम कहते हैं, उसके कंपोनेंट में वी आर हैविंग हेयर रिसेप्टर पोटेंशियल्स बीइंग फायर्ड अप, एंड दीज आर अ कॉन्टिन्यूस कंपोनेंट. ठीक है, दैट्स अ बैकग्राउंड नॉइज जो भी है. जो ऑल्टरनेटिंग कंपोनेंट इज योर प्योर साउंड फ्रीक्वेंसी के केस में वी गोइंग टू हैव एन ऑल्टरनेटिंग कंपोनेंट. फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर 200 अगर किसी भी 512 हर्ट्ज की अगर ट्यूनिंग फोक है, यू आर ट्राइंग टू लिसन टू दैट, द हेयर रिसेप्टर पोटेंशियल दैट इज गोइंग टू बी फायरिंग इज योर ऑल्टरनेटिंग कंपोनेंट. ठीक है. देन ये समथिंग नोन एज अ कॉक्लियर पोटेंशियल, वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. ठीक है, इन्हें हम ऑटो अकूस्टिक इमिशंस भी कहते हैं, एंड वी आल्सो कॉल देम एज माइक्रोफोनिक पोटेंशियल्स. तो इसका मतलब क्या है? दे ऑब्जर्व्ड कि whenever a person hears a click, or when you try to sound a click near his ear, what's going to happen is after some latency, after everything vibration और जो भी आप expect करोगे कुछ गूंजेगी आवाज, whenever all of that has happened, the outer hair cells will produce a characteristic sound which you can hear via microphone. So that potential is known as a cochlear potential, also known as the autoacoustic emissions. Okay. So what is the origin of them? They have the outer hearing cell. And क्यों इसका significance क्या है? Because autoacoustic emission, we use it as a neonatal newborn screening for your deafness. ठीक है. So if we have the cochlear potential, we have the hair receptor potential. Done हो गया. Then we have the summating potentials. ठीक है. They're again generated at the inner hair cell. And last में we can have the compound action potentials, which work on the all or none principle. जिसमें we have two phases, N1 and N2 phase, and where they're generated in the eighth nerve proper, distal portion of the eighth nerve. So you can study all of the differences between your cochlear microphonics, that are autoacoustic emissions, or your summated potentials, or your actual action potential, which have two phases, N1 and N2. Okay. So now how do we determine the loudness is mainly कि whenever the दो चीजें हमें डिटरमिन करनी है. पहले हमने डिस्कस किया कि कैसे हम फ्रीक्वेंसी को डिटरमिन करेंगे. ठीक है. अब हम देख रहे हैं कि हम लाउडनेस को कैसे डिटरमिन करेंगे. So whenever the sound becomes louder, so the amplitude of the basilar membrane vibration will increase, and hence जो भी membrane potential आप generate करोगे of the activated hair cell will become more depolarized or hyperpolarized. बात सिंपल है. अगर 5 डेसिबल का है तो वो कम मूव करेगा, 10 डेसिबल का है ज्यादा मूव करेगा, 15 डेसिबल का तो ज्यादा मूव करेगा. It all depends upon your how much amount of your transaction is happening to your hair cells. So that's one reason. ठीक है. The second reason is कि जितना जितना आप intensity of stimulus बढ़ाओगे, उतनी एक्टिवेशन ऑफ हेयर सेल्स वर आल्सो गोइंग टू इंक्रीज. पहला वाज हेयर सेल्स का एम्पलीट्यूड इज गोइंग टू इंक्रीज, जो भी मेम्ब्रेन पोटेंशियल जनरेट हो रहा है. नाउ वी आर डिस्कसिंग जितना जितना आप साउंड इंक्रीज करोगे, more amount of hair cells are going to get recruited. Okay, so that is the second reason for determining your loudness. All right. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk to you about is something by the known as the amplification by the outer hair cells. Just remember, outer hair cells के एक बहुत characteristic protein है उनके surface पे, that's known as prestin. Okay, and what does this prestin do is this prestin actually functions as a molecular motor. और जब ये contract करेगा, it's going to pull your basilar membrane up or down, and that's going to modulate your receptivity of the inner hair cells. So just remember it like that. जो outer hair cells है, that can function as your amplification. Okay, so the contraction of large number of prestin molecules that going to cause the outer hair cell to contract during depolarization, and hence you're going to see upward movement of the basilar membrane. Okay, all right. And what is influencing all of this is the olivocochlear bundle. Okay, olivo matlab it's going to arise from what? It's going to arise from the superior olivary complexes. Okay, okay. Now the last thing is determining the direction. कहाँ से sound आ रही है? How we can tell? So the thing is, whenever we have sound less than 3 kilohertz, that's your 3000 hertz, we basically determine by the time lag. ठीक है, कि दोनों ears के बीच में interaural time difference कितना है for less than 3000 hertz. For higher frequency, we mainly rely on कि intensity कितनी है. मान लो अगर left side पे if I'm कोई भी अगर clock है या there is a watch or there is some noise generating कुछ भी generate हो रहा है from the left side, एक थ्योरी ये कह रही है कि अगर वो लेस देन 3000 हर्ट्ज की वो अगर इंटेंसिटी फ्रीक्वेंसी है, then it basically depends upon कि left side पे that thing or that sound is going to appear earlier as compared to your right side, and hence I'm going to observe that it's coming from the left side. Okay, that whole process is mediated by the medial superior olive, that's your MSO. And what is that generating? What is that distinguishing between according to the interaural time difference? And I'm saying for higher frequency more than 3 kilohertz, how am I going to do that? It's basically dependent on your amplitude. कि जितना 2 years के बीच में difference create होएगा between the two amplitude, that is going to tell me where is the sound coming from, and the localization उसके according मैं बता सकता हूँ. This is for a horizontal direction. We're going to talk about the vertical one. So दो regions हैं. For less than 3000 hertz, mainly depend on the medial superior olive, है ना? हमने अभी पता था कि auditory pathway में superior olivary is a one portion that it synapses to. And for higher frequency sounds, we're mainly depending on your lateral superior olive. So what is determining the interaural time difference? It's a medial superior olive for less than 3 hertz. And for higher frequency, we're mainly dependent on your lateral superior olive, which is depending on your interaural intensity ka difference. So this is all you can go through. The MSO computes the location of a sound by interaural time differences. Okay? And your lateral superior olive hai, that's going to encode your sound location through interaural intensity differences. Less than 3000 ke case mein, it's mainly interaural time differences, and more than 3000 के केस में it's mainly your interaural intensity differences. ठीक है, I hope that's clear. All right. And what about the vertical sound mapping? ऊपर नीचे से कैसे आ रही है? That basically happens in the external ear. So just remember that horizontal sound mapping is due to the superior olive, whether it is medial superior olive or lateral superior olive, but mainly ऊपर और नीचे जो भी sound localization है, that's through your the structure of your pinna or your concha, जैसे भी वो arranged है उसके accordingly. ठीक है? Right. So this is what we're talking about कि जो ऊपर नीचे वाली sounds है that mainly perceived by and distinguished by your external ear. ठीक है? All. So that pretty much makes up for your vision and hearing. So there are many concepts which are being discussed आज के case में. ठीक है? So we are done with this lecture आज के लिए, and I hope you like this. ठीक है? And please give me a thumbs up if you love it. And so that concludes my discussion आज के लिए. So that's your vision and hearing. So आज we discussed a lot. We discussed a lot of different concepts. ठीक है? ठीक है? So all right, thank you for joining guys, and आज का session I think it was helpful to you. ठीक है? And all of these notes I've already shared on the Telegram group, so please follow it up as well. हमारे discussions are obviously going to be a much more detailed now because it's my favorite unit. ठीक है? That's your CNS, and I consider it as a very underrated unit. And whatever stuff that is being displayed over here is in a very integrated fashion, I would say. And the main textbook which I'm referring for, in case, and if you want to refer for, I'm saying if you have the time that is there, which we don't have actually, is mainly your neuroscience by Dale Perks. Okay? And there's also a very good Coursera lecture on it as well. So that's by your Dr. Leonard White. You can find it on Coursera. You can join it for free. You can complete the whole course for free. Okay? So For my references, I mainly refer to your neuroscience पे डेल पर्स as well as your जो reference हमारी physiology textbooks हैं like your GNOM इस केस में CNS के केस में ठीक है. So I thank you all for joining. So I'll be concluding my session for today, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Thank you. If there are any questions, please free to use the chat box. You can message it to us. You can message it to Cadiciously Yours as well. And I'm very grateful for your support, Hamesha. And please take care and study well.